You need to bring yourself up a little. Level.
Is that good?
No, that's good, I think. Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't fucking see anything. So I'm just gonna look. I'm just going to look straight and hope like I'm looking at something. Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of the Transform with MG podcast. I'm your host Martina Good. Today I am joined by my friend Didi Ferrari, who is a nutritionist specializing in women's health and cognitive behavior therapy. Welcome, Didi.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Didi and I met at a run club recently.
We did.
And when we were having lunch together, we
decided the stars aligned.
The stars aligned, yeah. I feel like we really shared a common passion for women's health, and that mainly stems from our own hormonal imbalances. That's really what got us here. So why don't we start off by just a brief introduction of who you are, what to do, and really what brought you to working with women on their hormonal issues, because you were diagnosed with a very rare condition yourself, right? So
yes.
Let's dive a little bit into that.
So, hi, my name is Didi. I have been a nutritionist and coaching women for the last 8 years. I specialise in women's health, so hormonal conditions such as perimenopause and menopause, PCOS, HA, some are endometriosis, a lot of the common issues that we struggle with having a reproductive organ and a menstrual cycle. So I guess at the beginning of my coaching journey, I didn't really have much awareness of how impactful our hormones were on women because I was still fairly young in my early 20s. I didn't really have the knowledge or the experience coaching. But as I progressed through those 8 years, I realised how important it is to have an awareness, a self-awareness of how hormones affect us individually. And so many of us have, as you said, like been on hormone control. We don't really understand how that affects our bodies or what's best for us, especially if you are interested in fitness and nutrition. Then there are some things to take into account to help optimize health, which is what we're here for. We want to be the happiest and healthiest versions of ourselves, and that's, I guess, what my coaching journey tries to bring to my clients is understanding them, giving them the education, how can we work fitness and nutrition into that, and just be their best selves.
Yeah, absolutely love that. So important that, you know, we do bring light to these issues. And like you're saying, before becoming a health coach, I didn't really know myself much about it. It was only through my own journey of having hypothalamic amenorrhea and then just going back and forward with the doctors, and given the only solution I was given was the pill, which I didn't really want to take. Despite knowing very little, I still believed that there is more natural ways. But why don't you dive into your condition and the journey that led you to where you are now?
Sure. So I was born with a pretty rare genetic condition called Turner syndrome, which means that I suffer with POI, which is premature ovarian insufficiency. So that just means that my reproductive system didn't quite form as properly as it should do when I was a child, and then growing up that has compounding effects on the amount of hormones that my body produces. So I had to go on hormone therapy from a pretty young age and spent pretty much like as most women, most females are, when they start their cycle they end up on the pill. So I was on microgynon and regevidon, some of those earlier I guess forms. I don't even know what is available now to women or what women are on, but some of those pills that were exogenous hormones, so progesterone and estrogen, which my body didn't have, so I had to replace those to get the benefits, because we need progesterone and estrogen in our bodies for bone density and all of the wonderful things that it brings, mental health and cardiovascular health that protects us. So I had my own journey. I even went to Harley Street to see a specialist who's more in the menopause realm, because I don't produce any hormones, so I had to completely replace them with patches or more menopause hormone replacement, HRT. So that kind of gave me an understanding of what that demographic of women are going through, because I was going through it myself. It's pretty rare for somebody in their 30s to kind of experience menopausal type symptoms or to seek that help at, you know, that's more kind of mid-40s, maybe into 50s when you go through the menopause, because the menopause is UK average about 52, but perimenopause is about up to 10 years, maybe 7 to 8 as an average. But there's this whole gap of time that we don't actually understand how our hormones fluctuate, how we can support that. So that was me, kind of my hormone journey, speaking to specialists, trialing different forms for myself, and then I can now hear my clients and how they're describing their symptoms and with nutrition and help them kind of bring awareness to what they're going through.
Yeah, so you have your own knowledge from your own experience basically, but also like having helped loads of clients go through the same. So why don't we just stick on with the topic of perimenopause, menopause. One thing you mentioned that the whole transition to menopause can take up to 10 years. So maybe let's talk about perimenopause. What does that look like? What can people expect? Maybe, you know, some symptoms that they themselves might identify if they are going into like their late 30s or 40s and can be anticipating going into this like transition of womanhood.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really glad you said like even late 30s, because we do, even in our 30s, need to have awareness of this period because we're not too far from it. And the more we set ourselves up in the early years from strength training, getting as much muscle and bone density as possible, we can protect our future selves. And sometimes when it comes to hormones, like we don't think about our 60-year-old selves, like bone density being really low, our muscle mass decreasing after the age of 30. So all of these things, when I'm talking to like one of my clients in their 20s that may have lost their cycle, or we just don't think these things are important for our 6-year-old self when we break a hip, you know, so we need to employ all those strategies. But perimenopause, I'll get a lot of clients come to me in their maybe early 40s or mid 40s with, I guess the most uncomfortable symptom for them is visceral fat gain, which is more of the, not subcutaneous fat, but like it's more abdominal orientated because of the transition of their hormones. So what happens is as we lose estrogen, we form more of a male fat pattern, which can be quite alarming because you can feel like you can wake up, look in the mirror, and you now have like this spare tire of visceral fat around your abdomen. And that can be just quite disconcerting. You feel like you've lost control over your body. You might start to be experiencing erratic cycles with your periods, brain fog, just mood swings. When you look at kind of the perimenopause, it's a roller coaster. I think when we think about just menopause in general, it's like, oh, we just lose estrogen, it goes down in a smooth line, that's it. But actually that 7 to 8 year period is completely erratic for some of us.
Or most people think menopause, like my period stops, that's it. And like my menstrual cycle comes to an end. Whereas very rarely women would consider all those years that are up and down. Which can be very challenging, as you mentioned already, some of the challenges that can occur and it being super frustrated for women.
Exactly, and if you think about what somebody's going through in their life at that point, you know, they may have achieved quite a high progression in their career, so then they're struggling with maybe just mood fluctuations that are kind of throwing them off, and they've got, you know, their families to look after. And as women of that age bracket, there's so much going on that some of those symptoms can really take it out of us. And what we're seeing is actually women stepping down from really high positions in their careers because they just struggle so much with those symptoms, which is such a sad position to be in. And yeah, that's definitely kind of through education and power that we can keep us, you know, in those roles for as long as possible.
Yeah, for sure. So like, given that these symptoms are for most part unavoidable, they're like natural things that are going to occur like as we age. What are some things that maybe you use with having PIO and with women going through perimenopause to help and deal with those symptoms?
Well, for myself, it wasn't a case of not needing hormones. Like at my age, I need to replace those hormones. So I'm automatically able to still get the benefits of having, you know, higher estrogen levels and protecting my bone mass because I've kind of just supplemented them as such. But for somebody that's going through the natural progression and doesn't want to be on HRT, it's more lifestyle accommodation, making sure their nutrition supporting their hormones, not yo-yo dieting, not going so low fat because fats are critical to hormones, having a high protein intake, and just, you know, focusing on stress management, sleep, water, the foundations, which we can lose sight of a lot of the time. At any point, at any age, but it's more important because we're already heightened to those transitions. We want to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And when you mention focusing nutrition on hormones, what exactly do you mean by that?
So I would kind of do a diary analysis of like, well, how often are they eating? How calorie dense is their day? And nutrient dense. So obviously calories being the main determinant of kind of like how much energy you have to support your body and what you're asking it to do. through perimenopause, we still have a lot of activities, maybe training, CrossFit, running. So you may be still trying to engage in a lot of output, but if you're not supporting your body, then you're not going to get the adaptations or the benefits from your training with that. So first of all, just making sure that they're supporting their general health, getting enough calories in, making sure their protein is a high intake in each of their meals, because that's important for our muscle protein synthesis and growing muscle and our bone density. So not going low fat. And I usually like to take clients on a bit of a journey just to make sure that they don't have any food rules or kind of toxic diet culture still lingering that manages their food at that point, so they can progress as quickly as possible.
Which is very common, because I feel it's even harder for older women right now. I believe that there was just a lot of influence from the media back in the 2000s. I feel like right now there still is, of course, but we have grown as a society, and there is a lot more exposure to like food freedom and breaking down food rules, as opposed to how it was 20, 30 years ago. So do you experience that, like, I suppose, a poorer relationship with food, or the mindset of having food rules with older women going through like perimenopause and menopause, as opposed to, I suppose, younger ones?
I would say, if you think about when they were introduced, everyone is so dependent. So I will have clients that have been on diet since they were 13 years old, right? That have been from the Weight Watchers camp, that generationally inherited their mother's disordered eating, whether that's having an almond mom or somebody who didn't support their own health through nutrition. And at that age, I think there was more occurrence of it, maybe if you're in your 40s. You know, even I in my 30s now, but I think the self-awareness and the digital era does bring light to more things, and we are a bit more self-aware. But yeah, the older we get, we're still having to digest 40 years of our relationship with food and what we've been exposed to. And that can be quite difficult to manage and to break down so you can actually get to where you need to be from a health perspective.
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot of natural ways to support the perimenopause transition and the menopause. And then let's maybe dive into HRT, because like people might be interested to hear like what if they're already doing all the lifestyle and dietary changes to support it and still just like not feeling as best as they could. So what are some options?
Well, I think it's always important just to have that discussion first with your GP, so that they can either maybe take some blood tests to assess where your hormone levels are at, even though it's not the most reliable, because throughout the day our hormones fluctuate all the time. So blood tests are kind of a separate thing, but always open that dialogue with your GP. If you wanted to start HRT, start it as early as possible. Like, don't wait until you're suffering, right? We want to maybe get it on board. So when I'll get a client that starts my coaching, they're like, oh, I think I'm going through the perimenopause. I'm like, these hormones take 3 to 6 months to get into your system, to get to good levels, to trial different forms of products. So we're wasting time if we're not kind of having those discussions early. So if you kind of think, oh, my mood changes, my cycles become irregular, and HRT is a discussion you want to have, just start that as early as possible. But a lot of the things you'll already be familiar with, we essentially just need to replace estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, being the 3 female sex hormones that are in our bodies. So the Mirena coil, like a lot of women might be familiar with IUDs, which is internal contraception, where you can have a coil fitted and that releases the progesterone needed. That's not a pill and it's not systemic, so it's local and keeps your womb lining thin. So that is from gold standard for HRT. It's currently, I believe, estrogen patches and the Mirena coil, but I could be completely wrong on that. Things change all the time. So patches, creams can come from the estrogen, and they come in different doses, so you can trial them. They come in patches. They are actually quite difficult. They're like trying to tear duct tape off your ass, like 2 to 3 times a week.
Oh God.
So you have to replace them. And something for me, like coming to Bali, I'm in and out of saunas and kind of like pools and things, and that's just not something I thought about. So you need to understand your lifestyle in relation to what's going to work for you as well. You see like Davina McCall or some of the people with like women going through it, sharing their experiences, which is amazing. They'll share their routines of putting their creams on in the morning, which, you know, brings that estrogen level up. So yes, but testosterone itself is something I really find such a less dialogue around for women.
I think it's very associated as the male hormone, and there's not enough spotlight brought to it that women really do need it. But that's where our like motivation comes, like the ability to complete tasks or confidence. Like it still plays such an important part on it, and it's forgotten almost because all the talk is about the estrogen and progesterone and the potential imbalances, or how obviously the levels of them downgrade as we get older. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about testosterone.
Well, at the minute there are cream is available, so you can have a depository and a cream that you put onto your body. It's a small amount. They used to only have the male version, which you would only be able to have like a tiny amount, because obviously men can tolerate a really higher dosage than females. But then an Australian brand, Androfem, that became more available, especially in the UK. I'm not sure about other kind of countries. But I had to go to Harley Street and go privately to get that. I know in the UK, they don't, I believe, give that on prescription or kind of through your GP, just the estrogen and progesterone, which is kind of really sad. So unfortunately, I believe you do have to go privately to have access to that, but I'm not sure if that's changed. So still have that conversation with the GP, see if you can fight for it and get that included in your HRT protocol.
So what would you say would be the first steps of somebody experiencing the symptoms that you mentioned of perimenopause? If they know that something is feeling a little bit off, like what is their like first call to?
I would say, it depends on like how self-aware you are, right? Like how introspective you kind of assess things, like your mood on a day, your sleep. Sometimes it gets to the point of just physical changes in the mirror, like, oh, my clothes aren't fitting anymore. Why is that? I would say 9 times out of 10, it's more the mood changes, the irritability, the wanting to see quite like rageful or like anger, kind of frustration and irritability with like partners and kids and kind of what's going on in your life, and stress management. So sometimes I'll see that be more like a change for them. They'll be like, I fly off the handle at the smallest thing. My intolerance to kind of difficulties is getting high. Then it might be the cycle, because obviously if you're pretty in tune with your cycle, you'll be like, oh, I'm a couple of days early, I'm a bit late, like what's going on there? I would say probably body changes, then cycle changes, and then, yeah, maybe mood fluctuations. One of those 3 will come first, I assume.
Okay, and then when you're kind of have at least the 3, then you're just like, right, I think like that is a sign that I go get my bloods done, hormones tested, CGP, or would you go straight down the route of like, I'm going to get a health coach to help myself manage that?
If you think you're in a position where like your diet and your lifestyle isn't healthy and that you recognize there are changes to make, I think that's a really good place to start. Some don't want to take exogenous hormones. They may have had really bad experiences with doctors or think it's kind of inconvenience. I'd always say have that discussion. I know a lot of women have come to me and say that they're just offered kind of antidepressants to deal with the mood changes, which is such a shame. So it's important to pick a GP that can speak your language, that understands you and is on your level, maybe specialises in gynecology, and is, if you have the ability to go private, I would always recommend that. It does save you a bit of time, even though it's obviously an additional expense and I guess luxury.
I know it does really depend on the individual and like what resources they have, but one thing I would say is like those symptoms are not in your head, and do stand your ground, because a lot of like from my experience from working with clients, like I tend to work with a younger generation. I suppose like you have more expertise in that, like perimenopausal, menopausal, but like younger ones, even when they are having symptoms in regards to the disruptions with their menstrual cycle, the way they're treated by some like medical doctors are astonishing. Like honestly, just being like, this is all in your head, this is just part of being a woman. So like make sure you stand your ground, and if you're experiencing symptoms, like they're not in your head and they're very valid and you should get answers, I would definitely encourage you to keep track of your symptoms so that you have like some data to go back to your GP or whatever doctor you're seeing, if it's a specialist, gynecologist, endocrinologist, and you know, give them the data of like, okay, this has been happening for X amount of weeks, months, or even go with somebody that's maybe been through something like that, or a very like supportive friend, like you have somebody to like back you up. Like if you don't fully have like an extensive knowledge of like, you know, what you should be hearing from a doctor, it's important to maybe go with somebody that has, so
Yeah.
that you're getting the right answers. And you don't need to just settle on one person. Like, you have to find the right person that's going to be able to treat you, because everyone is super like individual. So just because you didn't get the right treatment from one doesn't mean that you just have to deal with these symptoms for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. And from your perspective, I guess even dealing with the younger generation who may have lost their cycle, they're still going to be experiencing menopausal type symptoms. They don't have estrogen production. After 6 months, that already affects your bone density. So it might seem weird to kind of be discussing like mood changes, brain fog, those things, but basically a lack of estrogen and your hormones being suppressed or not, you know, at the sufficient levels that they should be, you're still going to be experiencing the kind of same things.
Yeah, for sure, because the lack of estrogen is the reason why these menopausal symptoms exist. So it doesn't really matter. Like, you don't have to be at that stage to be experiencing all these like negative symptoms. But I guess from my experience, like, where it all started off was like me going on a pill at the age of like 16. And the reason why I went for it, like, full disclosure, just contraception. And what I know now, if I knew back then, like, I probably wouldn't have chosen it, but I just wasn't aware. And it goes back to not having an informed consent. Like, I was just like, yep, this is your option. You just got to take it, without being explained the possible negative effects or maybe alternative methods. And this is not me here to like bash the pill as such. Everyone is entitled to their own choice when it comes to like whatever way they want to deal with like their menstrual symptoms. But I do believe that more women should have the knowledge on like what are the effects, the pros and cons, alternative methods, and then make your choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess like some of the myths surrounding like taking the pill is like, first of all, that it's going to regulate your cycle. And this is one of the most common reasons why the pill is prescribed. Actually, 1 in 3 women are prescribed the pill to regulate their cycle. And why that is a myth is because it literally cannot. It shuts off ovulation, right? So an ovulation is where we produce our hormones, and a real period will follow approximately 2 weeks after ovulation. So if hormonal birth control, like aka the pill, shuts off ovulation, that cannot regulate it, because you're not gonna actually get the real bleed. And where it becomes problematic is that people do get a period, right? They get a bleed, but that's a withdrawal bleed. So then they might be thinking, sure, I have a healthy menstrual cycle. My period arrives, you know, every 28, 30 days or whatnot, lasts for 5-7 days, and happy out, I'm a healthy person. And that kind of gives you misleading things, because you still could be having underlying hormonal issues that are being masked by the pill.
Absolutely.
So that's where I think people really get confused, because they still get that withdrawal bleed, which I was like when I was on the pill. You know, like I said, I started it at the age of 16, and my like cycle period worked like clockwork. Like, it arrived every like 29 days on the same day, lasted maybe like 4 days, no major symptoms. And then after 3 years, when I decided to take a break, like to my surprise, like my period never returned. And then I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And then, you know, I'm spending so much time, energy, money, going from GPs, going to specialists, getting scans done. And for majority of the parts, like, nobody can really give me an answer, rather than like, oh, maybe you should take the pill again so we can kickstart your cycle. Which, although I didn't know much at the time, what I knew is like, that is not, synthetic hormones are not gonna solve my issues temporarily. They might fix the problem. And another one is taking the pill to stop symptoms of PMS. So bloating, acne, cramps, and again, the pill is being prescribed because they're going to either minimize it or completely eliminate it. And they might, but short term.
Yeah, it's difficult, because in terms of the pros and cons, like the pros of hormonal contraception is those things you just described there can be so life-altering, skin issues, really affect your quality of life. So whenever I have somebody that's struggling with PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or some of the really bad PMS type symptoms, and they are at a loss, they're at their wit's end, of course it's an option, and it could be the best thing they've ever done. Getting the Mirena coil, going on contraception might make them feel like they're actually able to, you know, get on with their lives and lead a relatively normal life and manage their symptoms. It is there as an option.
Yeah.
But I guess to just throw it as a blanket statement for everyone and everything, yeah, of course no. But it is an option, and there have been some cases that with clients I'm like, well, thank God it was there for you. Thank God it was there to protect your bone density. Like, yes, you didn't get your menstrual cycle back, but we need to figure this out. And I guess a lot of women then come off hormonal contraception, and that reveals either symptoms of PCOS, that they have masked since they were 16 because they never knew about it. And they see these hormonal fluctuations manifest in mood, weight gain, all of these symptoms, and like, oh crap, like maybe I need to go back to it. But actually, you know, for us to kind of go through that, even as difficult as it is, it's so enlightening, rewarding, and gives you so much connection to your body. I think it's definitely something that I promote, but it's also not the only route.
Not the only room, and I feel like, of course, it has the benefits, especially when somebody is actually hit rock bottom and cannot even leave the house for whatever reasons. And if that actually improves the quality of their life, even though it doesn't solve the issues, then well and good. But I think more medical doctors should be promoting dietary changes and lifestyle changes alongside of it, rather than just putting a blanket statement being like, right, okay, here it is, take this, it might improve your symptoms, it might not. And then nobody wants to be on medication forever, right? So actually giving people the tools and knowledge on like, right, you know, with simple habit changes, simple diet changes, you can support your hormone health. You might not be able to like solve hormonal imbalances as such. That's depending on the severity of it as well, because I'm a true believer in like natural methods of healing yourself. But again, it just depends where you currently are and like how these symptoms are affecting the quality of your life. And if you can focus on making those changes with your diet and lifestyle as like a first protocol, like why not try? But yeah, I think another thing with the pill, and I'm not talking about like a hormonal IUD like the Mirena, but a pill in particular, is that it gives you synthetic estrogen, progesterone, right? With the Mirena, you still ovulate, like it doesn't suppress ovulation, which I feel like it's a much better alternative, even for conditions like PCOS and endometriosis. But with the pill, it has synthetic estrogen and progesterone. And if we suppress ovulation isn't only important for fertility or like, you know, to get pregnant, but that's where we produce all of our hormones, especially our female hormones, estrogen and progesterone.
Start around like death within 1 year. It's like ridiculously high if you break your hip.
Yeah, so that's where the importance of estrogen comes in. So if the pill suppresses ovulation and we're not getting that estrogen, then we're not supporting our bone density, and we're increasing our chances of bone fractures and mortality. Essentially. So an estrogen is important for regulating our mood as well. Like it's important in supporting the neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So like it's key for mental health and well-being. And that's where we kind of deal with issues like anxiety and depression. And then progesterone as well, I think that's where the biggest one is in terms of the pill providing progestins and not progesterones, which just like mimics that hormone, but it's not the same. And again, like with progesterone, it's needed for shedding the uterine lining. So we don't develop conditions like endometriosis and then go into that. And yeah, like the pill sort of helps with that. It like progesterone also helps to shed the lining, so this is where the withdrawal bleed comes in. But again, it's just not the same thing. So if we're talking about alternatives but then still involve like some regulation of a menstrual cycle, going for Mirena coil or, you know, the IUDs that still have hormones, they suppress menstruation, so you might not bleed, but you're still going to be ovulating. And it's like ovulation is the main event. People think like it's the period, but it is. Yeah, it's the main character of it all.
It is the Disney. It's the quest. It's the quest on the Disney film. But yeah, no, you're right. And with HRT, it's really important to remember that, like, if you have a womb, you have to have progesterone, because you cannot just take estrogen alone, because the consequence of building up your womb lining with that estrogen and that tissue lining becoming hyperplasia becomes then predisposed to cancer cells. So you have to take both. And what you'll find with like the progesterone side of things is, I was on Utrogestan before I got the Mirena coil, and that's a more bioidentical form of progesterone. But we can be so sensitive to progesterone when we take that in any form. So I really struggled gastrointestinally with that, and I know a lot of women do struggle with progesterone with their stomachs and kind of how that's absorbed into their bodies and how they feel on it. So it's important that it might not just be estrogen, you don't need to pack in the whole thing, it's just potentially different forms. You have to try out different things to find what works for you.
Yeah, that's important.
But even my experience with the coil, I had never had any skin issues. I took it purely because it was part of my protocol. I didn't have like really bad symptoms or mood changes. I hated the Mirena coil. And I found that so bizarre, because so many people talk highly about it, and I was so confused as to why I didn't like it. My skin broke out. I just didn't get on with it. And that's why it's so important that if you're really struggling, the Mirena coil can be like the best thing since sliced bread for you. But for me, having really no issues and taking it, I was like, what is this?
It will give you the opposite effect to what it does for most people.
Exactly. So that's just something yes, it's great. Like, we need to keep the dialogue going, but it is so important to remember that you are an individual and you need to find what works for you.
Yeah,
specifically.
100%. Everyone is bio-individual, and it's about trial and error sometimes. And like, this is why when you have symptoms, even if they're mild, go and get them checked out. Whether you're going to go to a health coach and get a protocol from one of us, or you're going to go to your doctor and get your bloods done, hormones checked, see what your options are before you agree to anything. But the earlier you can do it, the more time you're giving yourself to trial something out, see if it works for you. Doesn't, fine, don't stick with it, move on to something else.
Yeah. And you're going to need to have the data from your GP in terms of, like, thyroid issues can really have some of the compound, like, same symptoms, right? Mood changes or metabolism. So, like, we have to check other things and organs in your body to make sure that it's not being masked as something different before you then, oh, okay, it's that. Like, now I can progress on to looking at treatments for that. If it's thyroid, then fine. Like, you have options to support your body there. But hypothyroidism, autoimmune conditions, as women, we experience so many different things.
And a lot of times it stems from that. It stems from, like, if we look like at a pyramid, we have our thyroid and cortisol, which usually are the two main hormones that are going to have like a streamline effect on our female hormones. So when we're experiencing issues with like estrogen dominance or any imbalance between like progesterone and estrogen that then like give us this like negative symptoms, we do have to look at what's on the top tier, because our thyroid is responsible for our like energy, and so any fatigue and tiredness might not necessarily be down to the female hormones. Like, yes, like they could be imbalanced, but where is that imbalance coming from? Maybe it's not necessarily the estrogen, lack of estrogen that needs to be addressed, or estrogen dominance, but rather something to do with thyroid, hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, or even elevated cortisol that is impacting those female hormones.
Something I didn't really realise at the beginning of my coaching was the adrenal gland produces like cortisol and those kind of hormones. It also plays a part in progesterone production. As much as your ovaries and your corpus luteum, like once that egg is released, it's the lining of that then supports progesterone production. But if your body is so preoccupied with producing cortisol, it's not going to prioritise the production of progesterone. So people are like, well, is it just high cortisol? It's a bit of a buzzword in social media to just blame everything on women having high cortisol levels, which is a bit of a problem. But we are all just walking around constantly stressed about something.
Yeah.
But it makes sense as to why that and stress does impact your hormones and can imbalance things, because you can only do so much.
Yeah, if cortisol is constantly stealing the production of progesterone, like, then you're going to be lacking on it, and it's something to address. So, like, yeah, while it's overhyped, like, it definitely plays a huge role on it. So this is why it's important to not just be like, right, it's something to do with my female hormones, they might be out of whack, like there could be other issues that are underlying it. So it's good to get like a full panel of what's going on. And I always myself, and I recommend it to my clients as well, get your blood work done at least every 6 months, like at a bare minimum. Like,
that'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great,
because like you just want to identify and spot any potential deficiencies. Like, doesn't even have to be with your hormonal health, but even like deficiencies in terms of like minerals and vitamins that we need to put a protocol in place of like, all right, dietary changes are needed here, or even like supplements.
Yeah. And I guess stress in itself, like, when you employ different dietary protocols, like, so many women will come to me saying, do I need to be intermittent fasting to help with PCOS or menopause? Like, are there certain things we're doing? And there are a lot of people who, you know, have a very loud voice on social media because it is more exciting to think, right, I need to just fast.
More sexy.
It sounds sexy, but then, you know, the other day I did a discovery call with a female for PCOS, and she's like, should I start intermittent fasting? I was like, well, if we're looking at stress and cortisol, really is fasting going to be the most beneficial thing for you to be engaging with right now? We have so much to do with repairing your relationship with food, getting a healthy foundation to your nutrition, that just throwing a shiny object like a carnivore, keto, paleo, whatever is out there that you want to adopt. There are pros and cons, again, to everything, but as women, your relationship with food and where you need to be from a health perspective, I can pretty much guarantee you 9 times out of 10 I'm not going to support some of those drastic extremes when it comes to nutrition.
No, there's very rare cases on which those nutrition protocols are actually going to be beneficial for the person. Most of the time, like 9 out of 10, like they're going to be more detrimental, and they are going to cause more stress than it's needed. And like we're saying, if cortisol is at the top of the pyramid affecting all the other hormones, then it's just going to have a negative streamline effect on everything else. It's not going to improve you. Like, if you're more stressed about your diet, like, how is that improving the quality of your life?
Exactly. And like, hormones drive behavior. It's its primary function. So I'll get a lot of people have self-awareness around problematic behaviors, binge eating, overeating, doing things with their nutrition. I'm like, okay, so where are hormones at? Because this would make sense. It's not you just having a lack of willpower. This isn't you just like not being able to manage something. This is your body communicating something to you. So that is also important to remember, that like your estrogen, progesterone, they all are there to do something for fertility. Like estrogen, you know, it's the Beyonce of sex hormones. It's exciting. It's there to put yourself out there, to change the collagen of your skin, to signal fertility, to do all of these things. Whereas progesterone is your safety, your pregnancy hormone. So stay at home, anxiety increases. Like, once you understand hormones, you can be like, oh, that makes sense as to why I'm doing those things behaviorally.
And for anyone listening who has never considered the role of their hormones, how would you explain it in like very layman terms? Like, what?
In what way?
Like, why should people even care about hormones? What impact or effect they have on our body?
Well, I guess if you might come into this from like a cycle syncing being more optimal for your health kind of angle, and it's not that being in tune with your body and cycle syncing isn't like, might not help you, but I think as women we have so many things going on in our lives. Like, if you're following a strict training protocol, like whether you're at a certain point in your cycle is probably just not going to be something you're going to factor in. Like, I'm never going to be that person like, at this time in your cycle you should eat specifically this for this reason. Sure, there are guidelines that can help support you, like insulin sensitivity changing in the 2 phases of your menstrual cycle. If you're somebody that comes to me as a client and you're really struggling to manage PMS symptoms, I'd be like, well, maybe let's have a bit more fats in your luteal phase. And, you know, estrogen in those 2 weeks being higher, sure, maybe let's use that because your hunger is going to be reduced. Estrogen is an appetite suppressant. So am I going to try and start a client dieting in their luteal phase as compared to that? No. So like, if I'm coaching somebody for 6 weeks, got to think that as women, we pretty much only get 2 good weeks. We get 2 good
reality
weeks.
of it, but we can optimize it for
Exactly.
it. Yes, we don't have to fall victim of it, that we're going to be completely wiped and walking around super anxious and eating all around us for 2 weeks either.
Yeah.
So like...
Yeah, a lot of those things can be quite self-fulfilling, right? Oh, it's this day of the cycle. It means I get the chocolate. It means I do this. It's not that you shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's just when you feel more empowered and have that knowledge, it can be like, oh yeah, that's why I'm doing this today. Well, maybe I'll make a different choice.
Yeah, it's about just having the awareness of it, of why that's happening. It's like, why am I more hungry than usual? You know, it's listening to your body. It's like, okay, does it actually need more fuel? But like you're saying, it can become just like an excuse almost to like, I'm just not really going to move today because like my period's approaching, or I'm just going to eat all around me. But this is making everything worse. It actually like heightens your PMS symptoms then if you engage in those behaviors. So like that, it's not about being completely hard on yourself and ignoring it and then trying to still function just as you would when estrogen is high, and obviously adherence to diet might be better, like strength training might be better, energy might be better. No, it's still about like, right, okay, I know that I can take it easier. I probably should, because like in a couple of days I'd be back to myself, but not using that as just like an excuse just because I'm in this phase of the cycle. Everything else is just like going to go downhill.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right.
All right, well, I think we covered a lot today. That was a very, very insightful episode.
Yeah, it was good.
I think a lot of knowledge, like you're super knowledgeable around the area of like women's health, and there's a lot of practical takeaways for people to hear, or even just have a better understanding, because I really do believe knowledge is power, and that allows you to understand your own body better, like become the CEO of your body, because bio-individuality is so huge, and one protocol will not apply to everyone else, and trial and error is important. It's also important to have the right support from somebody that like, you know, understands the ins and outs of it, and not having to suffer through it alone as well.
True. Yeah, compassion and doing it, not feeling so alone is such an important part of like progression. I think as women we do struggle a lot to have that compassion for ourselves,
for sure,
because we're so hard on ourselves all the time.
Is there anything else you would like to add, Didi? Is there any like words of wisdom to the listeners when it comes to their...
I guess what we didn't just quite touch upon is the sheer lack of research when it comes to evidence-based. Like, we wonder why GPs struggle with not supporting us properly or at the best. We wonder why we don't know exactly what the best nutrition strategies are. It's because studying us at certain points of our menstrual cycle for these different things is a minefield. And that's not an excuse. I think it has been used as an excuse within science and research for a long time.
Yes.
I mean, we've come so far, and actually even... It's only until recently we were even allowed to participate in research studies.
2015?
I think it must have been,
Which is crazy.
It's wild.
Less than 10 years ago.
So hopefully as time progresses, there's more talks, conversations, awareness, we can have the science and research to support a lot of the things that we're talking about a little bit better.
Yeah, there's only 6% of research done exclusively on women, but also why?
So little.
Right. Yeah, so little, but it's not like... Why are we not studying women? Because it's very complex. Like, we do go through these hormonal fluctuations, which means like we don't operate as men do on like a 24-hour clock where it's just their testosterone that peaks and falls throughout the day and resets every those 24 hours. It's a lot more difficult, but it's needed. It's needed because like women cannot be labeled as smaller men and assume that the principles that apply to optimizing health, fitness, and well-being of men is going to work exactly the same on women who do have those hormonal fluctuations.
Yeah, we have still been trying to adopt a lot of the male strategy in terms of diet, nutrition, the fitness, even training, I'm sure. That's not quite my space, but we see that as time goes on, we see how actually some of those things can even be really detrimental to our health. You know, the fasting, the types of styles of training, the pushing ourselves to the absolute limits. Not that you shouldn't, but I think we're now coming to understand how the female body does react a little bit differently and how we should work with that as opposed to against it.
Yeah, and social media is great for that. More women are opening up. It's becoming less of a taboo subject. And if you think like a number of years ago, how many people or women were even speaking about their menstrual cycles? Like,
yeah, we've come a long way for sure, which is amazing. Still more to go.
Still more to go. Hopefully we'll be recording this in like 10 years and we're like, we got more research for you.
I know, how exciting would that be? Yeah. But yes, we're on a bit of a back foot, especially when it comes to the research for men. Obviously, we have a lot of data for animals in terms of, you know, the hormones and how they affect our bodies, but we're getting there.
We are.
Fingers crossed.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you did enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe at whatever platform you're listening to. Thank you, Didi.